Hi, I'm Dorothy Mitchell, and I need to tell you about the day my daughter-in-law Jessica drove me to SaveMart and left me stranded in the parking lot with a broken hip and melting groceries. She said I was moving too slowly and that she had more important things to do than babysit an old woman. What Jessica didn't know was that this old woman had built a 4-store grocery empire worth $5 million from absolutely nothing. 6 weeks later, when she waltzed into my lawyer's office expecting to inherit my life's work through my son Bobby, she discovered I'd left everything to someone she'd never even bothered to learn the name of. But the real shock came when I played the recording of her laughing about how she couldn't wait for me to die so she could sell my stores and move to Hawaii. Tell me, what would you do if someone who was supposed to love you treated you like garbage, then expected to profit from your death? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Dorothy Mitchell, but everyone calls me Dot. And at 74 years old, I thought I'd seen every kind of betrayal life could throw at a woman. I was wrong. I built Mitchell's Fresh Market from a single struggling store in Riverside, California, after my husband Frank died 32 years ago, leaving me with a toddler son and more debt than hope. Back then, grocery stores were a man's business, and the suppliers, the bank managers, and even some customers made sure I knew it every single day. They'd ask to speak to my husband when I was standing right there in my own store, wearing my name tag that clearly said, owner. They'd question my orders, doubt my credit, and whisper about how long it would take for the little widow to fail and sell to someone who actually knew what they were doing. But I didn't fail. I worked 18-hour days, slept on a cot in the back office more nights than I care to remember, and learned every aspect of the business from produce rotation to profit margins. I studied my customers like they were family members, remembering that Mrs. Chen preferred her bananas slightly green, that old Mr. Rodriguez needed his groceries bagged extra carefully because of his arthritis, and that the Johnson family always shopped on Wednesdays because that's when they got paid. I made my stores places where people felt seen, valued, and cared for, not just another transaction in someone's day. By the time Bobby graduated high school, I owned 2 stores. By the time he finished college, it was 3. When he married Jessica 5 years ago, I had just opened the 4th location in Paris, and Mitchell's Fresh Market was the most trusted grocery name in Riverside County. I was proud of what I'd built, not just the money or the properties, but the community I'd created. My employees stayed for years, sometimes decades. I knew their children's names, attended their weddings, and helped them through tough times. Carmen Rodriguez started as a part-time cashier 12 years ago while finishing her business degree, and now she's the manager of my flagship Riverside Plaza location. Miguel Santos has been my assistant manager for 8 years, and Patty Williams has worked the morning shift register for 15 years straight, never missing a day except when her daughter had surgery. This was the legacy I was building for Bobby. Not just wealth, but a business built on relationships, respect, and genuine care for both customers and employees. I wanted him to understand that success wasn't just about profit margins, but about being an integral part of your community's daily life. I imagined him walking through the stores one day, greeting longtime customers by name, knowing which products they preferred, and carrying on the tradition of treating every person who walked through our doors like they mattered. But Bobby never showed much interest in the business. He went to college for computer programming, got a good job at a tech company in Los Angeles, and seemed content with his life away from grocery stores and customer service. I didn't push him. I figured he'd come around eventually, maybe when he had children of his own and wanted something stable to pass down to them. I was patient. I had built this empire with patience, after all, and patience had never failed me before. Then he met Jessica at some company retreat in San Diego. She was beautiful, confident, and had opinions about everything from restaurant service to traffic patterns. When Bobby brought her home to meet me the first time, she walked through my flagship store like she was touring a museum. making little comments about the outdated tile floors and asking why we didn't have a sushi bar like the fancy chains. I tried to explain that our customers valued quality basics and personal service over trendy additions, but she just smiled that polite smile people use when they think you're old-fashioned and out of touch. The wedding was lovely, though expensive. I paid for most of it because I wanted Bobby to be happy, and Jessica had very specific ideas about what their special day should look like. She chose a venue that cost more than some people make in a year, a photographer who charged extra for every single family grouping, and a menu that required 3 tastings before she was satisfied. I wrote the checks without complaint because I could afford it, and more importantly, because I thought this was an investment in my family's future happiness. After the wedding, Jessica made it clear that she expected certain changes in Bobby's life, and by extension, in mine. She didn't think he should have to work weekends anymore, which meant he couldn't help me with inventory or store management, like he used to during busy periods. She planned elaborate vacations that required him to take time off during peak shopping seasons like Thanksgiving and Christmas, when I most needed family support. Most significantly, she started making comments about how I was getting older and should think about simplifying my life. At first, these suggestions seemed to come from a place of concern. She'd mention how tired I looked after long days at the stores, or point out that I was repeating myself in conversations. She'd suggest that maybe it was time to consider selling the business and enjoying my golden years, perhaps moving to one of those nice, active senior communities where I wouldn't have to worry about running a business anymore. When I'd explained that the stores weren't just my business, but my passion, my community, and my legacy, she'd nod sympathetically and change the subject. But over time, her comments became more pointed and less subtle. She'd make jokes about my memory in front of Bobby, laughing about how I'd supposedly told the same story twice in one evening, even when I knew I hadn't. She'd question my business decisions, asking Bobby if he thought it was wise for someone my age to be making major financial choices without oversight. She started referring to my employees as "your mother's hired help," rather than by their names, even though she'd met Carmen and Miguel multiple times and knew they were integral to the store's success. The real turning point came last spring when I had my hip replacement surgery. The doctor said I'd need 8 weeks of recovery time, with physical therapy and limited mobility for the first month. Bobby and Jessica offered to let me stay at their house in Corona Hills during my recovery, and I gratefully accepted. I thought it would be a good opportunity for us to spend more time together as a family, maybe even for Jessica to understand more about my life and what the stores meant. To me, I should have known better. From the moment I arrived at their house with my walker and my bag of prescription medications, Jessica treated me like an unwelcome house guest who had overstayed her welcome before she'd even unpacked. She'd sigh heavily when I needed help getting up from chairs, roll her eyes when I asked Bobby to drive me to physical therapy appointments, and make pointed comments about how long my recovery was taking compared to other people she'd heard about who had the same surgery. The house itself was beautiful, all sleek modern furniture and spotless white surfaces that showed every fingerprint. Jessica had decorated it like a magazine spread, with expensive art and furniture that looked impressive but wasn't particularly comfortable for someone recovering from surgery. My bedroom was the guest room at the end of the hall, nicely appointed, but clearly designed for short visits rather than extended stays. The bed was too high for me to get in and out of easily with my healing hip, and the bathroom was down the hall, which made nighttime trips challenging with my walker. But the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the emotional isolation I felt in that house. Bobby left for work early every morning and often didn't return until after 7 in the evening. Jessica worked from home doing marketing consulting, which meant she was around during the day, but she made it clear that my presence was an inconvenience to her routine. She'd take phone calls with clients and make exaggerated gestures if I walked through the living room with my walker, as if the sound of my movement was disrupting important business. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. During those long days alone in their house, I started to understand that Jessica saw me not as Bobby's mother or as a successful business owner, but as an elderly woman who was standing between her and the life she wanted. She never said it directly, but her attitude made it clear that she viewed my independence and my business as obstacles to her plans for Bobby's future. In her mind, I should have been a typical elderly mother who occasionally needed help and maybe contributed to holiday dinners, not someone who still ran a multi-million-dollar business and expected to make my own decisions about my life and my legacy. The grocery store incident happened on a Thursday afternoon in October, 6 weeks after my surgery, and 2 weeks after I'd finally been cleared to return to limited activities. I was using a cane instead of the walker by then, and my physical therapist, Dr. Kim, had said I was making excellent progress. I was planning to move back to my own house on Elm Street the following week, and I think Jessica was eager to accelerate that timeline. She announced that morning that we needed to go grocery shopping and that I should come along for the exercise. Bobby was at work, so it would just be the two of us, which I thought might actually be nice. I hoped that maybe spending time together outside the house might help us connect better, and I was genuinely excited to see how other grocery stores operated compared to my own. As a business owner, I always enjoyed studying the competition and looking for new ideas or improvements I could implement at Mitchell's Fresh Market. The morning started normally enough. Jessica helped me into her silver BMW, adjusted the seat and mirrors, and even asked if I was comfortable before we pulled out of the driveway. She seemed to be in a good mood, humming along to the radio and making pleasant conversation about the weather and her plans for the weekend. I started to think that maybe I'd been too hard on her, that perhaps the stress of having a recovering house guest had been more difficult for her than I'd realized, and that things would improve once I moved back to my own home. We drove to SaveMart on Magnolia Avenue, a store I'd been curious about because they'd recently renovated, and I wanted to see what changes they'd made to their layout and product selection. Jessica found a handicapped parking spot close to the entrance and helped me out of the car, even carrying my purse for me while I got situated with my cane. Inside the store, she grabbed a cart and suggested I lean on it for support while we shopped, which was actually helpful and thoughtful. For the first 20 minutes, everything went smoothly. We moved through the produce section, discussing which vegetables looked freshest and comparing prices to what I charged at my stores. Jessica seemed genuinely interested in my observations about product placement and customer flow, asking questions about why certain items were positioned where they were and how different stores tried to influence shopping patterns. I found myself enjoying the conversation and feeling hopeful that we might finally be building a real relationship. But as we moved into the packaged goods aisles, I noticed Jessica's patience beginning to wear thin. I moved slowly, partly because of my healing hip, but mostly because I was genuinely interested in studying the store's operation. I wanted to see how they organized their international foods section, what brands they carried that I didn't, and how their pricing compared to mine. This wasn't just casual shopping for me. It was research that could benefit my own business. Jessica, however, was clearly ready to finish and leave. She started checking her phone frequently, tapping her foot when I stopped to examine products, and making comments about how long we were taking. When I asked if we could walk through the bakery section because I was considering adding more fresh-baked items to my stores, she sighed audibly and said we didn't have time for a complete tour of the entire store. The tension escalated when we reached the checkout line. It was a busy afternoon and there were several people ahead of us. I didn't mind waiting. It gave me a chance to observe the checkout process and see how efficiently the cashiers worked. But Jessica was clearly agitated, shifting from foot to foot and checking her watch repeatedly. She made several comments about poor staffing and bad management, loud enough for other customers to hear, which embarrassed me. When we finally paid and loaded our groceries into the car, I thought the ordeal was over. Jessica started the engine and backed out of the parking space, but instead of heading toward the exit, she pulled into a spot near the far end of the parking lot, away from the store entrance and most of the foot traffic. "I forgot something," she said, not looking at me as she turned off the engine. "I'll be right back." She grabbed her purse and walked quickly toward the store, leaving me sitting in the passenger seat with the bags of groceries in the back. I wasn't immediately concerned. People forget items all the time, and I figured she'd be back in a few minutes. I watched other shoppers coming and going, observed how they loaded their cars and interacted with their families, and generally used the time to continue my informal research about customer behavior. But 15 minutes passed, then 20, then 30. The afternoon sun was warming the car uncomfortably, and I was beginning to worry. I tried calling Jessica's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. I called again 5 minutes later, with the same result. The groceries in the back seat included frozen items and dairy products that needed to be refrigerated, and I could see condensation forming on some of the packages. After 45 minutes, I realized that Jessica wasn't coming back anytime soon, and that I needed to take action to get myself home. I was too far from the store entrance to walk there safely with my cane, especially carrying groceries, and I didn't want to leave the car unlocked with all our purchases inside. I also didn't have keys to get back into Bobby and Jessica's house, since Jessica had them in her purse. I called Bobby at work, but his assistant said he was in meetings all afternoon and couldn't be reached except for emergencies. I explained that I was stranded in a parking lot and needed help, and she promised to get him the message as soon as possible. Then I called my longtime friend Helen Vasquez, who had been checking on my house while I recovered at Bobby's. Helen was shocked when I explained the situation and immediately drove to SaveMart to pick me up. When Helen arrived 30 minutes later, she found me still sitting in Jessica's BMW, now nearly 2 hours after Jessica had walked away. The frozen groceries had thawed completely, and I was feeling dizzy from the heat and stress of the situation. Helen helped me transfer the groceries to her car, left a note on Jessica's windshield explaining where I'd gone, and drove me straight to my own house on Elm Street. "Dot," Helen said as she helped me inside, "that woman left you there on purpose. This wasn't about forgetting something in the store. I wanted to argue with her, to defend Jessica and assume there had been some kind of misunderstanding or emergency that had prevented her from returning to the car. But deep down, I knew Helen was right. The way Jessica had parked far from the store entrance, the way she'd avoided eye contact when she said she'd forgotten something, the way her phone had gone straight to voicemail for 2 hours, none of it suggested an innocent mistake. Bobby called me that evening, full of apologies and explanations. Jessica had told him that she'd run into an old friend at the store and lost track of time while catching up. She claimed she'd looked for me in the car, but thought I'd gone inside to find her when she couldn't locate me in the parking lot. According to Bobby, she was devastated that there had been a misunderstanding and felt terrible that I'd been worried. But I knew it wasn't a misunderstanding. A woman doesn't lose track of time for 2 hours while her elderly mother-in-law with a healing hip sits alone in a hot car. A woman doesn't forget to check her phone for 2 hours when she knows someone is waiting for her. And a woman certainly doesn't park far away from the store entrance if she's genuinely planning to run in quickly for a forgotten item. That night, lying in my own bed in my own house for the first time in 2 months, I realized that Jessica hadn't just abandoned me in a parking lot. She had shown me exactly what she thought of me and what she believed I deserved. In her mind, I was an inconvenience to be managed, not a person to be respected. I was an obstacle between her and Bobby's attention, between her and the lifestyle she wanted, and ultimately, between her and my business empire. For the first time since Frank died 32 years ago, I felt truly alone and vulnerable. But more than that, I felt angry. Not the hot, explosive anger that burns out quickly, but the cold, calculating anger that builds slowly and plans carefully. Jessica had made a serious mistake that day in the SaveMart parking lot. She had underestimated Dorothy Mitchell, and that was going to cost her everything. The next morning, I woke up in my own bed for the first time in 2 months, and everything felt different. Not just the familiar creaking of my old house settling, or the way the morning light filtered through the lace curtains I'd hung 15 years ago, but something fundamental had shifted inside me. The woman who had graciously accepted help during her recovery, who had tried so hard to build a relationship with her son's wife, who had made excuses for small cruelties and overlooked countless slights. That woman had been left behind in a parking lot yesterday. Helen arrived at 8:30 with fresh coffee and homemade blueberry muffins, settling into my kitchen like she belonged there. We'd been friends for over 20 years since her late husband Carlos had been my produce supplier back when I only had one store. She was one of the few people who had watched me build Mitchell's Fresh Market from the ground up, who had seen me cry over cash flow problems and celebrate when we finally turned our first real profit. "You look better," she said, studying my face as she poured coffee into my favorite blue ceramic mug. "More like yourself." I told her about Bobby's phone call, about Jessica's elaborate explanation involving an old friend and a supposed misunderstanding. Helen listened without interrupting, but I could see her jaw getting tighter with each detail I shared. "Honey, you know that's complete nonsense, right?" Helen's voice was gentle but firm. "I drove past that SaveMart 3 times looking for you. There was no group of women having a reunion in the parking lot. There was no emergency that would have kept her inside for 2 hours. She left you there because she wanted to." I knew Helen was right, but hearing someone else say it out loud made it real in a way I wasn't quite ready to face. For 32 years, I had built my life and my business on the belief that people were fundamentally good, that if you treated them with respect and kindness, they would return the favor. It was the foundation of everything I had accomplished, from my relationship with longtime employees to my reputation in the community. But why would she do something like that? I asked, even though part of me already knew the answer. Helen reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "Because she sees you as an obstacle, not as family. She wants Bobby all to herself, and she wants your business without having to earn it or wait for it." The phone rang before I could respond, and Bobby's name appeared on the caller ID. I answered on the 3rd ring, trying to keep my voice normal and pleasant. "Mom, how are you feeling this morning? Jessica is just sick about what happened yesterday. She wants to take you out to lunch today to make up for the confusion." I looked at Helen, who was shaking her head vigorously and making slashing motions across her throat. "That's very thoughtful, Bobby, but I'm not ready for another outing quite yet. Maybe next week when I'm feeling stronger." There was a pause, and I could hear muffled conversation in the background, Jessica's voice rising slightly. "Actually, Mom, Jessica thinks it would be good for you to get out of the house. She's worried that if you isolate yourself, you might start feeling depressed. She read an article about how seniors can develop anxiety after medical procedures if they don't maintain social activities." Jessica had been with Bobby for 5 years, and in all that time, she had never once expressed concern about my emotional well-being. Now, suddenly, she was an expert on senior psychology and worried about my mental health. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. "I appreciate her concern, Bobby, but I'm perfectly fine. Helen is here with me, and I have plenty of social contact. I just need a few more days to settle back into my own routine." More muffled conversation, Jessica's voice becoming more insistent. "She really wants to make this right, Mom. She feels terrible about the misunderstanding." The word misunderstanding hung in the air like a challenge. I could go along with the fiction, accept the carefully crafted explanation, and pretend that yesterday had been an innocent mistake. It would be easier for everyone, would maintain the family peace that I had worked so hard to preserve. But it would also be a lie, and I was tired of enabling lies for the sake of other people's comfort. "Bobby, there was no misunderstanding. Jessica left me alone in a hot car for 2 hours with no explanation and no way to contact her. That's not something that happens by accident." The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When Bobby finally spoke, his voice was strained and defensive. "Mom, you're making this sound worse than it was." Jessica explained what happened. "Sometimes these things just occur, and there's no point in turning it into a big drama." Helen was watching my face, and I could see my own anger reflected in her expression. My son, the boy I had raised to be honorable and truthful, was asking me to accept a lie to protect his wife's reputation. He was choosing her comfort over my dignity, her convenience over my safety. Bobby, I'm 74 years old. I just had major surgery, and I was abandoned in a parking lot. If that's not worth taking seriously, I don't know what is. You weren't abandoned, Mom. You're being dramatic. Jessica would never do something like that intentionally. The certainty in his voice told me everything I needed to know about where his loyalties lay. In Bobby's mind, questioning Jessica's version of events was unthinkable, which meant that either he truly believed her story or he had chosen to believe it because the alternative was too uncomfortable to consider. After I hung up, Helen and I sat in silence for several minutes, drinking our coffee and watching the morning news. Finally, she spoke. You know this isn't going to get better, right? This is who she is, and Bobby's not going to stand up to her. I had spent the last 5 years hoping that Jessica would eventually warm up to me, that time and patience would help us build a genuine relationship. I had told myself that her coldness was just shyness, that her critical comments came from a desire to help, that her lack of interest in my business was simply due to different priorities. But yesterday had stripped away all those comfortable delusions. Helen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. She nodded, setting down her coffee mug and giving me her full attention. Have you ever heard Jessica say anything about me when she thought I wasn't listening? At family gatherings or community events? Helen's hesitation was answer enough, but she took a deep breath and continued anyway. Last Christmas, at the Riverside Chamber of Commerce holiday party, I was in the ladies' room when Jessica came in with her friend, that blonde woman who works at the bank. They didn't see me in the stall. My stomach clenched, but I needed to hear this. Jessica was complaining about having to spend Christmas morning at your house, about how you always make too much food and want everyone to stay too long. She said she couldn't wait until Bobby inherited the stores so they could sell them and move somewhere more exciting. The words hit me like a physical blow. Jessica hadn't just been planning my business's future, she had been planning its destruction. Everything I had built, every relationship I had cultivated, every tradition I had established would be wiped out so she could fund a more exciting lifestyle. She said the stores were outdated anyway, that grocery chains were a dying business model, and that the real estate was worth more than the ongoing operations. Her friend asked if Bobby was on board with selling, and Jessica laughed and said he'd do whatever she wanted once his mother was out of the picture. I closed my eyes, feeling 32 years of work and sacrifice being reduced to real estate values and profit margins. Jessica didn't just dislike me. She actively resented my existence and was counting the days until she could erase everything I had accomplished. There's more, Dot. I'm sorry, but you need to know. I opened my eyes and nodded for her to continue. She said you were getting senile anyway, that you repeated yourself in conversations and made poor business decisions. She told her friend that Bobby was worried about your mental state, but was too afraid to confront you about it. The betrayal was complete. Not only was Jessica planning to destroy my business, but she was also systematically undermining my reputation and my relationship with my own son. She was painting me as a confused old woman who couldn't be trusted to manage her own affairs, setting the stage for Bobby to step in and take control of my assets for my own good. I spent the rest of that day thinking about everything Helen had told me, reviewing every interaction I'd had with Jessica over the past 5 years with this new understanding. Suddenly, her suggestions about simplifying my life made sense. Her questions about my memory and decision-making abilities weren't casual observations, but calculated attempts to plant seeds of doubt about my competence. Her lack of interest in learning about my business wasn't indifference but deliberate ignorance designed to make the eventual sale easier to justify. That evening, Carmen Rodriguez called to check on my recovery and update me on how the stores were running in my Absence. Carmen had been managing the Riverside Plaza location for 3 years, and her success had exceeded every expectation I'd had when I promoted her. Sales were up 12% over the previous year. Customer satisfaction scores were at an all-time high, and employee retention was the best it had been in decades. Mrs. Mitchell, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but the staff has been asking about your plans for the business. There have been some rumors in the community about potential changes, and people are worried. My heart sank. If rumors were already circulating about changes to Mitchell's Fresh Market, Jessica's plans were more advanced than I had realized. What kind of rumors, Carmen? Some people are saying that your son and his wife might be taking over operations, and that there could be major restructuring or even closures. Mr. Santos from the Mexican restaurant next door mentioned that someone had been asking about property values in the shopping center, specifically about our lease terms. Jessica wasn't just planning to inherit my business. She was already researching how to dismantle it. She was treating my life's work like a real estate investment to be optimized rather than a community institution to be preserved. Carmen, I want you to know that there are no plans to close or sell any of the stores. Mitchell's Fresh Market will continue operating exactly as it always has. There was relief in Carmen's voice when she responded. Thank you for saying that, Mrs. Mitchell. This business means everything to so many people, employees and customers alike. We were all hoping that the rumors weren't true. After we hung up, I realized that I wasn't just dealing with a personal family conflict anymore. Jessica's plans would affect dozens of employees who depended on their jobs at my stores, hundreds of customers who relied on us for their daily shopping needs, and the broader community that had grown up around Mitchell's Fresh Market as a local institution. For 3 decades, I had been more than just a business owner in Riverside. I had sponsored Little League teams, donated to school fundraisers, provided jobs for teenagers and single mothers and older workers who might not find opportunities elsewhere. My stores had been gathering places where neighbors ran into each other, where elderly customers could count on personal attention, where families could shop without feeling rushed or unwelcome. Jessica saw all of that as inconsequential, as obstacles to profit rather than assets to be preserved. In her mind, sentiment was inefficiency, and community connection was just poor business practice that prevented maximum return on investment. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Frank Carlson, and scheduled an appointment for the following week. I told his secretary that I needed to review and update my estate planning documents, that there had been some changes in my family situation that required legal attention. When she asked if it was urgent, I assured her that it wasn't an emergency, but that it was important enough to prioritize. I also called Dr. Kim, my physical therapist, and asked if she could recommend someone who could help me with some equipment I needed for recording purposes. I explained that I was working on some business documentation and needed clear audio recordings of meetings and conversations. She suggested a colleague whose husband worked in audio equipment sales, and I made arrangements to meet with him that afternoon. Helen drove me to the electronics store, where I purchased a small, high-quality digital recording device that could capture conversations clearly and store them securely. The salesman showed me how to operate it, how to download the files to my computer, and how to create backup copies of important recordings. I told him I was working on oral history interviews with longtime community members, which wasn't entirely untrue. That evening, I practiced using the recorder, testing its range and clarity, learning how to position it for optimal sound quality without being obvious about its presence. I was amazed at how small and discreet modern recording technology had become. The device was barely larger than a thumb drive and could record for hours without needing new batteries. As I sat in my living room, testing the recording equipment and thinking about my conversation with Carmen, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. A sense of purpose and control. For the first time since my surgery, I wasn't reacting to other people's decisions or accommodating their preferences. I was planning, strategizing, and taking action to protect what mattered to me. Jessica had made a critical error when she abandoned me in that parking lot. She had assumed that I was weak, confused, and dependent, that I would accept her treatment without question and be grateful for whatever scraps of respect she chose to offer. She had mistaken patience for passivity, kindness for stupidity, and age for incompetence. But I hadn't built a multi-million-dollar business by being weak or passive. I had succeeded by being observant, strategic, and absolutely relentless when protecting what I valued. Jessica was about to learn that the woman she had left in a parking lot was the same woman who had outmaneuvered every competitor, outlasted every economic downturn, and outworked every obstacle that had tried to stop her over the past 3 decades. The recording device sat on my coffee table, small and innocent-looking, but I knew it was going to be the tool that would save everything I had built. Jessica wanted to play games with my legacy, wanted to manipulate my son and destroy my life's work for her own benefit. She had chosen the wrong opponent, and now she was going to discover exactly what Dorothy Mitchell was capable of when someone threatened her family, her business, and her community. I was no longer the recovering surgery patient who needed help and accommodation. I was no longer the hopeful mother-in-law who made excuses for bad behavior and tried to keep peace at any cost. I was back to being the woman who had turned a failing grocery store into an empire, and Jessica was about to find out why that transformation had taken 32 years of careful strategy, absolute determination, and the kind of patience that could wait as long as necessary for the perfect moment to strike. The game had changed, and for the first time since Bobby had brought Jessica home to meet me, I was the one setting the rules. The first recording happened by accident, 3 days after I bought the equipment. Bobby and Jessica came to my house on Sunday afternoon, ostensibly to check on my recovery and help me with any household tasks I might need assistance with. I had the small recorder in my cardigan pocket, not because I was planning to use it, but because I was still getting comfortable with carrying it and wanted to practice having it available when needed. Jessica walked through my house like she was conducting an inspection, commenting on everything from the outdated kitchen appliances to the need for better lighting in the living room. She picked up family photos from my mantelpiece, studying them with an expression I couldn't quite read, then set them down in slightly different positions than where they had been. "Dorothy, this house is really too much for you to maintain alone," she said, running her finger along the windowsill and examining it for dust. "Have you thought about hiring a cleaning service? Or maybe considering a smaller place that would be easier to manage?" I was sitting in my recliner, the one Frank had bought me for my 60th birthday, watching her move through my personal space with the confidence of someone who already owned it. Bobby was in the kitchen, supposedly checking my refrigerator to make sure I had adequate food supplies, but I could hear him opening and closing cabinets as if he were taking inventory. "I've been managing this house perfectly well for 23 years, Jessica. I don't think my hip surgery has changed my ability to maintain my own home." She smiled that particular smile she used when she thought I was being unreasonable, the one that made me feel like a stubborn child who didn't understand what was best for me. "Of course you have, but you're not getting any younger. It's just smart planning to think about these things before they become problems. Bobby and I were talking about how much we worry about you living alone, especially after what happened at the store yesterday." The way she said it, you would think I had collapsed in the grocery aisle rather than been deliberately abandoned in a parking lot. She was already rewriting the narrative, turning her cruelty into evidence of my frailty. Bobby returned from the kitchen carrying a notepad where he had apparently been writing down items he thought I needed to purchase. "Mom, you don't have much food here. Are you eating regular meals? Jessica thinks we should set up a grocery delivery service for you, just to make sure you're getting proper nutrition." I looked at my son, this 45-year-old man who had apparently forgotten that I had been feeding myself successfully for over 7 decades, including the 32 years I had been running grocery stores. The irony of him worrying about my access to food was almost comical. "Bobby, I've been planning meals and shopping for groceries since before you were born. I think I can manage to keep myself fed." Jessica moved closer to Bobby, creating a united front that physically excluded me from their circle. "We're just concerned, Dorothy. Living alone at your age can be isolating, and isolation can lead to poor self-care habits. We've read that. Seniors often don't realize when they're not taking proper care of themselves." There it was again, the casual use of psychological terminology to pathologize my independence. In Jessica's world, wanting to live in my own home and manage my own affairs wasn't a reasonable preference, but a symptom of age-related decline that required intervention. "Jessica, I appreciate your concern, but I'm perfectly capable of taking care of myself. My doctor is very pleased with my recovery, and I'll be back to full activities within the next few weeks." She exchanged a look with Bobby, one of those wordless communications that couples develop over time. In this case, it seemed to convey that I was proving her point about seniors not recognizing their own limitations. "That's wonderful that you're feeling confident," she said in a tone that suggested the opposite. "But confidence isn't the same as capability. Maybe it would be good for you to have some objective input about your situation." I felt my hand move instinctively to the recorder in my pocket, and almost without thinking, I pressed the record button. Something about Jessica's tone and the way she was building towards something made me want to capture whatever was coming next. What kind of objective input? Bobby cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable but apparently committed to whatever script they had rehearsed. "Mom, we think it might be helpful for you to talk to someone about the transition you're going through. Someone neutral who can help you think through the practical aspects of aging and maybe help you make some plans for the future." Jessica nodded encouragingly, as if Bobby were a student who had remembered his lines correctly. "There are wonderful counselors who specialize in senior transitions. They can help you process the changes in your physical abilities and think realistically about what adjustments might make your life easier and safer." The word safer hung in the air like a threat. What they were really saying was that I needed professional help to accept that I was no longer competent to make my own decisions, that my desire for independence was actually a dangerous delusion that required therapeutic intervention. "Are you suggesting that I need psychiatric evaluation because I want to live in my own house and run my own business?" The question was direct enough that both of them looked uncomfortable, but Jessica recovered quickly. "Of course not, Dorothy. We're just talking about practical support to help you navigate this new phase of your life. Getting older is a big adjustment for everyone, and there's no shame in getting help to handle it successfully." I could feel the recorder still running in my pocket, capturing every word of this carefully orchestrated intervention designed to convince me that my mental state was declining and that I needed their guidance to make appropriate decisions about my future. "And I suppose you two have already researched these counselors and have recommendations about who I should see." Bobby looked relieved that I seemed to be engaging with their suggestion rather than rejecting it outright. "Actually, yes. Jessica found someone who comes very highly recommended, Dr. Patricia Hoffman. She specializes in helping seniors and their families work through these kinds of transitions together." Jessica pulled out her phone and showed me a website for Dr. Hoffman's practice. The tagline read, "Helping families navigate the challenges of aging with compassion and practical solutions." She has extensive experience with cases where seniors are having difficulty accepting changes in their capabilities. Her approach is very gentle, very respectful, but also very realistic about what's in everyone's best interests. The phrase "everyone's best interests" was particularly telling. This wasn't about my well-being. It was about managing a problem that my independence created for their plans. "I see. And how exactly did you find Dr. Hoffman? Did you just happen to stumble across her website while browsing the internet?" Jessica's smile faltered slightly, the first crack in her carefully constructed presentation. "I've been researching resources for seniors ever since your surgery, just in case we needed them. I wanted to be prepared to help you with whatever support you might need during your recovery." It was a plausible explanation, but something about her delivery made it clear that her research had been much more specific and purposeful than she was admitting. How thoughtful of you to plan for my future mental health needs. Did Dr. Hoffman have any particular insights about my situation when you spoke with her? Bobby looked confused. Mom, Jessica hasn't spoken with her. She just found her contact information in case we needed it. But Jessica's expression told a different story. There was a flash of something, panic or anger, that crossed her face before she regained her composure. I may have made a preliminary inquiry just to understand her approach and availability. I wanted to make sure she would be a good fit before suggesting her to you. So Jessica had already contacted Dr. Hoffman and discussed my situation with her, probably presenting herself as a concerned family member dealing with a stubborn senior who refused to acknowledge her declining capabilities. She had been building a case against my competence before I even knew I was being evaluated. And what did you tell Dr. Hoffman about my situation during this preliminary inquiry? The recorder in my pocket was capturing every hesitation, every uncomfortable pause, every moment when Jessica's careful script fell apart under direct questioning. Just general information about your recent surgery and our concerns about you living alone. Nothing specific, just the kind of background that would help her understand how she might be able to help. Bobby was looking back and forth between Jessica and me, clearly sensing tension, but not understanding its source. In his mind, this was a reasonable conversation about getting me appropriate support during a difficult transition. He had no idea that his wife was systematically building a case for my incompetence. Jessica, I'm curious about something. When you spoke with Dr. Hoffman, did you mention that I own and operate a successful business? Did you tell her about Mitchell's Fresh Market and my role in managing 4 store locations? Again, that flash of something across her face, quickly covered by renewed confidence. I may have mentioned that you were involved in some business activities, but I focused more on the immediate concerns about your physical recovery and living situation. Some business activities. My 32-year career building a multi-million-dollar enterprise had been reduced to some business activities that weren't worth mentioning to a professional who was supposed to evaluate my mental competence. And did you discuss with Dr. Hoffman your opinion that the stores should be sold because grocery chains are a dying business model? This time, Jessica couldn't hide her surprise. She obviously hadn't expected me to know about her conversation with her friend at the Chamber of Commerce party, and now she was trapped between denying something I clearly knew and admitting to, discussions she didn't want to acknowledge. I think there may be some misunderstanding about conversations that were taken out of context. No misunderstanding, Jessica. I know exactly what you said about my business being outdated and the real estate being worth more than the ongoing operations. I also know what you said about waiting for me to be out of the picture so Bobby could inherit the stores and you could sell them. Bobby's face went white. Mom, what are you talking about? Jessica never said anything like that to me. I looked at my son, this man I had raised to be honest and fair, who was now caught between his mother's accusations and his wife's denials, and I felt sorry for him. He genuinely had no idea what kind of person he had married, what kind of plans she had been making, or how systematically she had been working to undermine his relationship with me. Bobby, your wife has been planning the destruction of Mitchell's Fresh Market since before she married you. She sees my business as an investment to be liquidated, not a legacy to be preserved. Jessica stood up abruptly, her composure finally cracking completely. This is exactly what I was worried about, Bobby. She's becoming paranoid, creating elaborate conspiracy theories about innocent conversations. This is classic senior behavior when someone is losing their grip on reality. It was a masterful recovery, turning my accurate accusations into evidence of mental decline, using my knowledge of her plans against me as proof that I was delusional. These aren't conspiracy theories, Jessica. These are facts. You told your friend Sarah at the bank that you couldn't wait until Bobby inherited the stores, so you could sell them and move somewhere more exciting. You said I was getting senile anyway, and that Bobby was too afraid to confront me about my mental state. Bobby looked stunned, turning to stare at his wife with an expression I had never seen before. "Jessica, did you say those things?" She moved closer to him, placing her hand on his arm in a gesture that was both possessive and protective. "Bobby, you know how social conversations can be. Sometimes people say things they don't really mean, especially when they're frustrated or worried about family situations. Your mother is taking casual comments completely out of context and building them into some kind of plot against her." But I could see doubt in Bobby's eyes for the first time since he had brought Jessica home to meet me. The specific details I had mentioned were too accurate to dismiss as imagination, and the conversation was too consistent with other things Jessica had said and done for him to ignore completely. "Mom, how do you know about this conversation? Were you there?" "No, Bobby, I wasn't there. But Helen Vasquez was, and she heard every word." Jessica's face hardened at the mention of Helen's name. She had always disliked Helen, partly because Helen had known me for so long and had witnessed my success, and partly because Helen had never bothered to hide her skepticism about Jessica's motives. "Helen Vasquez has never liked me, Bobby. She's probably been filling your mother's head with stories because she wants to cause problems in our marriage." It was another skillful deflection, turning the source of information into the problem rather than addressing the content of what had been revealed. "Helen has been my friend for over 20 years, Jessica. She has no reason to lie about what she heard, and she certainly has no interest in causing problems in Bobby's marriage." Bobby was standing in the middle of my living room, looking lost and confused, obviously struggling to reconcile the woman he thought he had married with the picture that was emerging from our conversation. "I need to think about this," he said finally. "There are obviously some serious misunderstandings happening here, and I need to figure out what's true and what isn't." Jessica immediately moved to control the narrative, recognizing that Bobby's doubt represented a threat to everything she had been working toward. "Bobby, you know me better than anyone. You know I would never say cruel things about your mother or make plans behind your back. This is exactly what Dr. Hoffman warned might happen when seniors start experiencing cognitive changes. They become suspicious and paranoid, especially about family members who are trying to help them." The reference to Dr. Hoffman's warnings was particularly clever, suggesting that Jessica's conversation with the therapist had included predictions about my likely behavior rather than just general background information. "Wait," Bobby said, looking confused. "I thought you said you only made a preliminary inquiry with Dr. Hoffman. It sounds like you had a detailed consultation with her about Mom's mental state." Jessica realized her mistake immediately, but it was too late to take back the implication that she had discussed my psychological condition in depth with a professional therapist. "I wanted to be thorough in understanding how to help your mother, Bobby. Dr. Hoffman explained some of the common patterns families see when seniors are struggling with independence issues." I watched this exchange with fascination, seeing Jessica scramble to maintain control of a situation that was rapidly spiraling away from her. The recorder in my pocket was capturing every contradiction, every admission, every moment when her carefully constructed facade slipped and revealed the calculating mind underneath. "Jessica," I said quietly, "I think it's time for you to leave my house." She turned to face me, and for just a moment the mask dropped completely. I saw pure hatred in her eyes, the kind of cold fury that comes from being thwarted by someone you consider inferior. "This isn't over, Dorothy. Bobby deserves better than a mother who puts her own stubborn pride ahead of her family's well-being." With that, she grabbed her purse and walked out my front door, leaving Bobby standing in my living room looking like his world had just collapsed around him. "Mom, I don't know what to believe anymore." I reached into my pocket and turned off the recorder, knowing that I had captured everything I needed to prove that Jessica's concern for my welfare was actually manipulation designed to serve her own interests. "Bobby, sit down. We need to have a conversation that should have happened a long time ago." He sank into the chair Jessica had vacated, running his hands through his hair and staring at the floor. Did she really say those things about selling? The stores? Yes, she did, and much more than that. Helen heard her laugh about how she just had to survive me long enough to inherit everything. Bobby looked up at me with eyes that reminded me of the little boy he used to be, the one who would come to me when other kids were mean to him at school. Why didn't you tell me before now? Because I hoped I was wrong. Because I wanted to believe that she would eventually come to appreciate what our family has built together. Because I didn't want to put you in the position of having to choose between your wife and your mother. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us processing the implications of what had just happened. What happens now, Mom? I looked at my son, this good man who had been manipulated and lied to by someone he trusted, and I made a decision that would change everything. Now, Bobby, you're going to learn exactly who you married and what she's been planning for your future. And then you're going to decide whether you can live with that knowledge or whether you need to make some changes in your own life. The recorder in my pocket felt warm against my side, filled with evidence that would prove everything I had told Bobby and much more besides. Jessica had made another critical mistake today, revealing more than she intended and creating a record of her true intentions that no amount of psychological manipulation could explain away. As Bobby sat in my living room struggling with the collapse of his marriage, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months: complete clarity about what needed to happen next. Jessica had declared war on my family and my business, and now I had the tools I needed to fight back. The game was no longer about keeping peace or maintaining family relationships. It was about protecting everything I had built and everyone who depended on it. Jessica wanted to play the role of concerned family member worried about a declining senior. I was about to show her what a sharp, strategic businesswoman looked like when someone threatened everything she valued. The recording device had given me something more valuable than evidence. It had given me Jessica's own words, her own admissions, and her own contradictions. In her arrogance and confidence, she had provided me with everything I would need to destroy her plans and protect my legacy. Bobby eventually went home that evening, promising to think carefully about everything that had been revealed and to have some serious conversations with his wife about their future together. I knew those conversations would be difficult and painful, but they were necessary if he was ever going to understand the truth about the woman he had married. After he left, I sat in my recliner and listened to the entire recording 3 times, taking notes about the most damaging admissions and contradictions. Jessica had revealed far more than she realized, not just about her plans for my business, but about her methods for manipulating Bobby and her strategies for undermining my competence. The woman who had abandoned me in a parking lot thinking she was dealing with a helpless old lady was about to discover that Dorothy Mitchell hadn't built an empire by being helpless. She had built it by being smarter, tougher, and more patient than anyone who had ever tried to take it away from her. Jessica's biggest mistake hadn't been leaving me in that parking lot. Her biggest mistake had been underestimating exactly who she was dealing with, and now she was going to pay the price for that error in judgment. Over the next 3 weeks, I collected evidence with the methodical precision I had once used to analyze profit margins and inventory turnover. Every phone conversation with Jessica became a potential recording session. Every family gathering became an opportunity to document her true feelings about me and my business. She had no idea that the confused old woman she was trying to manipulate was actually conducting a comprehensive investigation into her character and intentions. The breakthrough came during Thanksgiving dinner at Bobby and Jessica's house. I had been reluctant to accept their invitation, but Bobby had called personally to ask me to come, saying that he wanted us to try to work through our differences as a family. Jessica had been surprisingly gracious during the phone call, apologizing for our previous confrontation and suggesting that we had both said things in the heat of the moment that we didn't really mean. I arrived at their house carrying my usual contribution of homemade apple pie and cranberry sauce, but also carrying the small recording device tucked safely in my purse. Jessica greeted me at the door with a smile that seemed almost genuine. helping me with my coat and commenting on how much better I looked since my recovery had progressed. The first part of the evening went smoothly enough. We made polite conversation over appetizers, discussed the unseasonably warm weather, and carefully avoided any topics that might lead to conflict. Jessica had prepared an elaborate meal with all the traditional dishes, and I complimented her cooking sincerely. For a few hours, it almost felt like we might actually be able to function as a normal family. But as the evening progressed and Jessica had several glasses of wine, her carefully maintained facade began to slip. The conversation turned to holiday shopping plans, and somehow evolved into a discussion about the local economy and how various businesses in Riverside were adapting to changing retail trends. "It's really sad to see so many of the old family businesses struggling," Jessica said, refilling her wine glass. "The grocery industry especially has become so competitive with all these big chains moving in. I honestly don't know how smaller stores can even survive anymore." She was looking directly at me as she said this, and I could see the calculation behind her concerned expression. "Mitchell's Fresh Market seems to be doing quite well," I replied carefully. "Our customer loyalty has always been strong, and people appreciate the personal service we provide." Jessica nodded sympathetically. "Oh, of course, Dorothy, but you have to admit that it's getting harder every year, and at some point you have to think about whether it's worth the stress and exhaustion of trying to compete with corporations that have so many more resources." Bobby was busy carving the turkey and didn't seem to be paying close attention to our conversation, but I could see Jessica building towards something. "I mean, realistically, how much longer can you keep up the pace of running 4 stores? It's an enormous responsibility for someone at any age, let alone someone in their 70s who's dealing with health issues." There it was, the gentle suggestion wrapped in concern that I was too old and frail to continue managing my own business. "I'm feeling quite capable, actually. My hip has healed completely, and my doctors are very pleased with my overall health." Jessica smiled that particular smile again, the one that suggested I was being naive about my own limitations. "That's wonderful that you're feeling confident, but feeling capable and being capable aren't always the same thing. Bobby and I have been talking about how much we worry about the stress you're under, especially after what happened at SaveMart." She was using the parking lot incident as evidence of my declining competence, turning her own cruelty into proof that I couldn't handle normal activities without supervision. "Jessica, what happened at SaveMart had nothing to do with my capabilities and everything to do with your decision to abandon me there." The wine had made her bolder than usual, and instead of deflecting or denying, she actually laughed. "Dorothy, you're being dramatic again. I stepped away for a few minutes and you turned it into some kind of abandonment crisis. That kind of overreaction is exactly what Bobby and I are concerned about." I could feel the recorder in my purse capturing every word, every dismissive laugh, every casual admission that she had deliberately left me alone in that parking lot. "A few minutes? Jessica, you were gone for over 2 hours." She waved her hand dismissively, as if the specific duration was irrelevant to the larger point she was trying to make. "The point is that you panicked over something minor instead of handling it calmly. That's the kind of behavior that makes us worry about your judgment in more serious situations." Bobby looked up from the turkey, finally tuning into our conversation. "What are you two talking about?" Jessica immediately shifted into her concerned daughter-in-law persona. "We're just discussing some of the challenges your mother is facing as she gets older, honey. I'm worried that she's not being realistic about the changes she needs to make to stay safe and healthy." I watched my son's face as Jessica painted me as a delusional senior who refused to acknowledge her declining abilities. This was the narrative she had been building systematically, using every interaction to reinforce her claim that I was becoming incompetent and needed their intervention. "Mom, are you having trouble managing things? Because if you are, we want to help." The sincerity in Bobby's voice broke my heart. He genuinely believed that his wife was concerned about my welfare. and he had no idea that her expressions of worry were actually attacks on my independence designed to serve her own agenda. Bobby, I'm managing everything just fine. The stores are profitable, my health is good, and I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions about my life and my business. Jessica took another sip of wine and shook her head sadly. Dorothy, this is exactly what Dr. Hoffman said would happen. Seniors who are experiencing cognitive changes often become defensive when family members try to help them. The denial is actually a symptom of the problem. I felt a chill run down my spine. Jessica was quoting a conversation with Dr. Hoffman that went far beyond the preliminary inquiry she had admitted to making. She had clearly had extensive discussions about my mental state with a therapist I had never met, discussions that had included specific predictions about my behavior and reactions. Jessica, exactly how many conversations have you had with Dr. Hoffman about my supposed cognitive changes? She realized immediately that she had revealed more than she intended, but the wine had made her less careful about covering her tracks. I've been consulting with her regularly about how to handle this situation, Dorothy. She's been very helpful in explaining the patterns families typically see when seniors start declining. Bobby set down the carving knife and stared at his wife. Jessica, you've been seeing a therapist about my mother's mental state? Without telling me? I could see panic flash across Jessica's face as she realized that Bobby was finally beginning to understand the scope of her manipulation. I wanted to get professional guidance before we had to deal with a crisis, Bobby. Dr. Hoffman has been helping me understand the best approaches for intervention when seniors become resistant to necessary changes. The word intervention sent a chill through the room. Jessica wasn't just planning to inherit my business. She was building a case for having me declared incompetent so she could take control of my assets while I was still alive. What kind of intervention, Jessica? I asked quietly. She looked around the dining room as if searching for an escape route, but there was nowhere to go except forward with the truth. The kind that protects everyone involved, Dorothy. When seniors can no longer make sound decisions about their finances and their safety, sometimes families have to step in and provide the guidance and oversight they need. There it was, finally out in the open. Jessica's plan wasn't just to inherit my business after I died. It was to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could take control of Mitchell's Fresh Market immediately. And Dr. Hoffman supports this intervention approach? Jessica's confidence was returning as she convinced herself that she was fighting for Bobby's best interests against his stubborn, declining mother. Dr. Hoffman has been very clear that families often have to make difficult decisions to protect seniors who can no longer protect themselves. She's prepared to provide professional documentation of your cognitive decline and your need for supervised care. Bobby looked like he had been hit by a truck. Jessica, are you talking about having my mother committed? Not committed, Bobby. Just legally protected. There are procedures for ensuring that seniors who can no longer handle complex financial decisions don't put themselves or their families at risk. I reached into my purse and placed the recording device on the dining room table, pressing the stop button with a click that seemed to echo through the suddenly silent room. Jessica, I want to thank you for being so honest about your plans. This conversation has been extremely enlightening. She stared at the recorder as if it were a snake that had suddenly appeared among the Thanksgiving dishes. You recorded our conversation. I've been recording all of our conversations for the past 3 weeks, Jessica. Every admission, every contradiction, every moment when you revealed your true intentions about me and my business. Bobby picked up the recorder and looked at it like it contained evidence of a crime, which in many ways, it did. Mom, what is this? This is documentation of your wife's systematic plan to have me declared mentally incompetent so she can take control of Mitchell's Fresh Market and sell it for real estate development. Jessica stood up abruptly, wine glass in hand, her face flushed with anger and alcohol. You have no right to record private family conversations. That's probably illegal, and it certainly shows that you're becoming paranoid and delusional." I looked at her calmly, feeling more in control than I had in months. "Actually, Jessica, California is a one-party consent state, which means I have every right to record conversations I'm participating in. And these recordings will be very useful when I meet with my lawyer tomorrow to update my will and discuss legal options for protecting my business from fraudulent claims." The color drained from Jessica's face as she realized that her carefully constructed plan was not only exposed, but documented in her own words. "Bobby, you can't let her do this. She's obviously not thinking clearly. This whole recording scheme proves that she needs professional help." But Bobby was staring at the recorder in his hands with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of disgust and disbelief that his wife had been capable of such calculated manipulation. "Jessica, did you really plan to have my mother declared incompetent so you could sell her business?" "I plan to protect our family's financial future from an old woman who's too stubborn to admit she can't handle her responsibilities anymore." The mask was completely off now, and Jessica's true feelings about me were finally visible for Bobby to see. "She's 74 years old, Bobby. How much longer do you think she can keep running around playing businesswoman? At some point, someone has to make the practical decisions she's too proud to make herself." Bobby set the recorder down carefully and looked at his wife as if he were seeing her for the first time. "Jessica, that woman you're talking about built a multi-million-dollar business from nothing. She's not playing at anything. She's more successful than either of us has ever been. Success that should belong to our family, Bobby. Success that she's wasting on sentimental nonsense about community service and employee loyalty when it could be providing us with the kind of life we deserve." I watched my son's face change as he finally understood not just what Jessica had been planning, but who she really was underneath the carefully constructed facade he had fallen in love with. The kind of life we deserve? "Jessica, we already have a good life. We both have careers. We own a beautiful house. We can afford whatever we want. What more do we need?" Jessica's laugh was bitter and revealing. "We could have so much more, Bobby. We could travel anywhere we wanted, buy a house in Hawaii or Colorado, never have to worry about money again. Instead, your mother hoards her wealth like some kind of miser, spending it on a business that's basically charity work disguised as commerce." Ah, there it was. The complete truth about how Jessica viewed my life's work and my relationship with my community. In her mind, caring about employees and customers was evidence of poor business judgment rather than good character. Bobby stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Jessica, I want you to pack a bag and go stay with your sister for a few days. I need time to think about everything that's happened here tonight." "Bobby, you can't be serious. You're going to choose your delusional mother over your own wife." "I'm choosing the truth, Jessica. And the truth is that you've been lying to me about your intentions, manipulating me into questioning my mother's competence, and planning to destroy something she spent 30 years building." Jessica looked around the dining room desperately, as if someone else might materialize to support her position. "This is insane, Bobby. I'm trying to help this family plan for the future, and you're treating me like I'm some kind of criminal. You consulted with a therapist about having my mother declared incompetent without ever telling me. You made plans to sell her business without discussing it with anyone. You abandoned her in a parking lot and then lied about it. What would you call that behavior, Jessica?" She grabbed her purse and coat, moving with the jerky motions of someone whose careful plans had just collapsed around her. "I call it taking care of business that needed to be handled, Bobby. Someday you'll realize that I was trying to protect you from having to make these difficult decisions yourself." With that, she walked out of their house, leaving Bobby and me sitting at the Thanksgiving table surrounded by the wreckage of what had seemed like a normal family dinner. We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us processing what had just happened. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she was capable of something like this." I reached across the table and took his hand, feeling closer to my son than I had in years. Bobby, you're not responsible for her choices, but you are responsible for deciding what kind of person you want to be married to. The next morning, I called Frank Carlson and scheduled an emergency meeting for that afternoon. When I arrived at his office, I brought the recordings, my notes, and a clear understanding of what needed to happen to protect my business and my legacy. Frank, I need to make some significant changes to my estate planning. I also need to understand my legal options for protecting my business from fraudulent claims about my mental competence. He listened to portions of the recordings with the expression of a lawyer who had seen many types of family conflicts, but was still occasionally surprised by the depths of human manipulation. Dorothy, what Jessica has done could constitute elder abuse, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. You have grounds for restraining orders and possibly criminal charges. I'm not interested in destroying her, Frank. I just want to protect what I've built and make sure it goes to people who will preserve it rather than liquidate it. We spent 3 hours that afternoon restructuring my will, establishing protections against competency challenges, and creating a succession plan that would ensure Mitchell's Fresh Market continued operating as a community-focused business, regardless of what happened to me. The main beneficiary of my estate would be Carmen Rodriguez, who had proven over 12 years that she understood and shared my values about customer service and employee treatment. Miguel Santos would receive a significant ownership stake in recognition of his loyalty and management skills. Long-term employees like Patty Williams would receive financial security through profit-sharing arrangements that would continue for the rest of their working lives. Bobby would inherit my house and a substantial financial legacy, but the business would go to people who had earned it through dedication and service rather than family connection. 3 weeks later, Bobby filed for divorce. Jessica fought it, viciously, demanding spousal support and a share of assets that she claimed to deserve because of her contributions to their marriage. But the recordings I had made proved her motives and character so clearly that her lawyer eventually advised her to accept a minimal settlement rather than risk having her behavior exposed in public court proceedings. 6 months after that Thanksgiving dinner, Mitchell's Fresh Market celebrated its 33rd anniversary under Carmen's leadership. The stores were more profitable than ever, employee satisfaction was at an all-time high, and customer loyalty had actually increased as word spread about the business's commitment to community values over corporate profits. Jessica moved to Phoenix and took a job with a real estate development company, presumably finding the kind of ruthless business environment that better suited her personality. Bobby focused on rebuilding his life and slowly reconnecting with the values and relationships that Jessica had tried to make him abandon. As for me, I moved into a small apartment near the Riverside Plaza store, where I volunteer 3 days a week helping train new employees and serving as a customer service consultant. I'm no longer responsible for the daily operations of the business, but I'm still involved enough to see my legacy continuing in capable hands. The woman who abandoned me in a parking lot thinking she was dealing with a helpless victim learned that Dorothy Mitchell hadn't built an empire by being helpless. I had built it by being patient, strategic, and absolutely ruthless when protecting what mattered most to me. Jessica had made the mistake of underestimating someone based on age and appearance, assuming that kindness meant weakness and that patience meant passivity. She discovered too late that the most dangerous opponents are often the ones who wait until they have all the information they need before they strike. The recording device that captured her admissions and contradictions wasn't just evidence of her manipulation. It was proof that even at 74, I was still sharper, smarter, and more strategic than anyone who tried to take advantage of me. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even with the people who hurt you. Sometimes it's building something so beautiful and lasting that their attempts to destroy it only make it stronger. Mitchell's Fresh Market didn't just survive Jessica's plans to liquidate it. It thrived under leadership that understood that success isn't just about profit margins, but about creating value for everyone whose lives you touch. And that, more than any legal victory or personal vindication, was the real triumph. Jessica had tried to erase 30 years of work and community building for short-term financial gain. Instead, she had helped me ensure that my legacy would continue for generations, protected by people who shared my values and understood that true wealth comes from service, not just from accumulation. The parking lot where she left me that October afternoon has been repaved and redesigned, but every time I drive past it, I remember the moment when I stopped being a victim and started being a strategist. That was the day Dorothy Mitchell decided to fight back, and Jessica never knew what hit her. The morning after Thanksgiving, I woke up in my own bed with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The recording device sat on my nightstand, containing hours of Jessica's own words condemning her plans and revealing her true character. But more than that, I had finally seen my son's face when he realized what kind of woman he had married. The shock, the disgust, the dawning understanding that his wife had been systematically manipulating him while planning to destroy his mother's life work. Helen arrived with coffee and pastries from the bakery downtown, taking one look at my expression and settling in for what she knew would be a long conversation. "It's over, isn't it?" she said, not really asking a question. "Not over, Helen. Just beginning." Jessica showed her true face last night, and now Bobby knows exactly who he's been living with. I told Helen about the dinner, about Jessica's wine-fueled admissions, about the revelation that she had been consulting regularly with Dr. Hoffman to build a case for having me declared incompetent. Helen listened with growing amazement and anger, occasionally shaking her head at the audacity of Jessica's schemes. "That woman actually thought she could have you committed and steal your business?" She didn't think of it as stealing, Helen. In her mind, she was just accelerating an inevitable inheritance and making smart financial decisions that Bobby was too sentimental to make himself. Helen poured herself another cup of coffee, her hands shaking slightly with suppressed rage. "Dot, you know this isn't going to end quietly, right? Jessica's not the type to accept defeat gracefully. She's going to fight back, and she's going to try to make you look like the villain in all this." I had been thinking about exactly that possibility since I woke up. Jessica was cornered now, her carefully constructed plans exposed and her marriage potentially destroyed. Desperate people do desperate things, and Jessica had already proven she was willing to lie, manipulate, and abandon vulnerable seniors to get what she wanted. "I know, Helen. That's why I'm calling Frank Carlson this morning. I need legal protection in place before Jessica has time to regroup and start spreading stories about my mental state." Frank's office was able to fit me in at 10 o'clock, and by 10:30 I was sitting across from him explaining the previous night's revelations while he listened with the grim expression of a lawyer who specialized in family conflicts. "Dorothy, what you're describing is a textbook case of elder abuse and attempted fraud. Jessica's consultations with Dr. Hoffman without your knowledge or consent, her plans to have you declared incompetent, her systematic attempts to undermine your relationship. With Bobby, these are serious crimes, not just family disagreements." He pulled out a legal pad and began taking notes as I described the recorded conversations, Jessica's admissions about her plans for the business, and her casual dismissal of abandoning me in the parking lot. "I want to hear these recordings. Dorothy, if they contain what you say they do, we have multiple options for protecting you and your assets from any future attempts at manipulation or fraud." We spent the next 2 hours listening to selected portions of my conversations with Jessica, Frank occasionally stopping the playback to make notes about particularly damaging admissions or contradictions in her story. "This is remarkable documentation. Dorothy, Jessica has essentially confessed to conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and attempted theft through deception. But more importantly for your immediate concerns, she's created a clear record of her motivations and methods that will protect you from any competency challenges she might try to file." Frank explained that Jessica's recorded statements about my supposed mental decline, combined with her obvious financial motivations for wanting control of my assets, would make it virtually impossible for her to successfully challenge my competence in court. No judge is going to take seriously a competency petition filed by someone who's been recorded laughing about waiting for you to die so she can sell your business. The recordings prove that her concerns about your mental state are pretextual rather than genuine. We began drafting new estate planning documents that would not only reflect my true wishes for Mitchell's Fresh Market, but would also include specific protections against the kind of manipulation Jessica had attempted. I want the business to go to Carmen Rodriguez, I told Frank. She's been managing the Riverside Plaza location for 3 years, and she understands what Mitchell's Fresh Market means to the community. She's earned this opportunity through dedication and performance, not family connection. Frank nodded approvingly. That's smart succession planning, Dorothy. Someone who's already proven their competence and commitment is much more likely to preserve what you've built than someone who inherits by default. We also established trust structures that would provide financial security for long-term employees, like Miguel Santos and Patty Williams, ensuring that their loyalty and service would be rewarded with profit-sharing arrangements that would continue throughout their careers. For Bobby, I created a substantial inheritance that would give him financial security without involving him in business operations he had never shown interest in managing. What about potential challenges to the will, Frank? Can Jessica claim that I was manipulated or coerced into changing my estate plans? Frank smiled grimly. Dorothy, you have hours of recordings proving that any manipulation in this family was coming from Jessica, not toward you. You've documented her attempts to undermine your competence, her plans to profit from your death, and her systematic efforts to turn your son against you. If anything, these recordings prove that you were acting in self-defense, not being influenced by outside pressure. By the time I left Frank's office that afternoon, I had comprehensive legal protection in place and a clear understanding of my options if Jessica decided to escalate her attacks. But more importantly, I had a plan that would ensure Mitchell's Fresh Market continued serving the Riverside community long after I was gone. Bobby called that evening, his voice heavy with exhaustion and confusion. Mom, Jessica left this morning. She took some clothes and said she was going to stay with her sister while we figure things out. But I don't think she's planning to come back. I could hear the pain in his voice, and despite everything Jessica had done, I felt sorry for my son. He had loved someone who was incapable of loving him back, someone who saw him only as a means to an end rather than as a person worthy of genuine affection and respect. How are you doing with all this, Bobby? There was a long pause before he answered. I keep thinking about all the things she said about you, all the times she convinced me you were being unreasonable or stubborn. I feel like such an idiot for believing her. Bobby, you're not an idiot. You trusted someone you loved, and that's what good people do. The fact that she abused that trust says something about her character, not yours. But I should have seen it, Mom. I should have noticed that she was manipulating me, that she was planning something like this. I thought about my own experience over the past 5 years, about all the small cruelties and dismissive comments I had made excuses for, all the times I had chosen to see the best in Jessica rather than acknowledging what was right in front of me. Bobby, we all see what we want to see when it comes to people we care about. I spent 5 years hoping Jessica would eventually accept me as family, ignoring signs that should have been obvious. Love makes us optimistic, sometimes to our own detriment. We talked for another hour about the recordings, about Jessica's plans for the business, and about the difficult decisions Bobby would need to make about his marriage and his future. Mom, I want you to know that whatever you decide to do with the business, I support it completely. You built Mitchell's Fresh Market, and you have every right to choose who should carry it forward. The relief I felt at hearing those words was overwhelming. For months, I had been afraid that protecting my business would mean losing my relationship with my son. Now I realized that standing up to Jessica's manipulation had actually brought us closer together than we had been in years. The next few days passed quietly, with Bobby handling the practical aspects of Jessica's departure, while I focused on implementing the changes Frank and I had planned. I scheduled meetings with Carmen and Miguel to discuss their new roles in the business succession plan, and I began preparing documentation that would ensure a smooth transition when the time came. Carmen's reaction to learning about her inheritance was everything I had hoped for and more. "Mrs. Mitchell, I don't know what to say. This is beyond anything I ever imagined or expected." We were sitting in my office at the Riverside Plaza store, surrounded by the financial records and operational reports that documented 3 decades of steady growth and community service. "Carmen, you've earned this opportunity through 12 years of dedicated service and exceptional management. You understand what Mitchell's Fresh Market means to our customers and our employees, and I trust you to preserve those values while continuing to grow the business." Tears were streaming down her face as she struggled to process the magnitude of what was happening. "I promise you, Mrs. Mitchell, I will never forget what this business represents or what you've taught me about treating people with dignity and respect. Mitchell's Fresh Market will continue to be a place where everyone feels valued and welcome." Miguel's reaction was equally emotional when I explained his profit-sharing arrangement and his role in the expanded management structure. "Mrs. Mitchell, you gave me a chance when no one else would. I came here 8 years ago barely speaking English, and you saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. I will spend the rest of my career honoring what you've built here." These conversations reminded me why I had fought so hard to protect Mitchell's Fresh Market from Jessica's plans to liquidate it. This wasn't just a business. It was a community of people who had grown together, supported each other, and created something meaningful that extended far beyond profit margins and real estate values. A week after Thanksgiving, Jessica made her move. Bobby called me at 7 in the morning, his voice tight with anger and disbelief. "Mom, Jessica's filed some kind of legal petition claiming you're mentally incompetent and that your recent changes to your will were made under duress or delusion." I had been expecting this, but it was still jarring to hear that Jessica was actually trying to implement her plan despite being exposed and recorded. "What exactly is she claiming, Bobby?" "According to the papers I was served this morning, she's saying that your behavior over the past few months shows clear signs of paranoid delusion, that you've been making irrational decisions about your business and your assets, and that the family needs court protection to prevent you from harming yourself financially." The audacity was breathtaking. Jessica was using her own manipulation and abuse as evidence of my mental decline, claiming that my rational responses to her cruelty were actually symptoms of psychological deterioration. She's also claiming that I'm being manipulated by outside influences who are taking advantage of my confused mental state to benefit themselves financially. I assumed the outside influences Jessica was referring to were Carmen and Miguel, the employees who would benefit from my revised estate planning. In Jessica's worldview, anyone who wasn't family but stood to inherit from me must be manipulating me for their own gain. "Bobby, are you worried that there might be some truth to her claims?" The question hung in the air for several seconds before he answered. "Mom, after hearing those recordings, after seeing how systematically she lied to me and manipulated both of us, I wouldn't believe Jessica if she told me water was wet. She's not filing this petition because she's concerned about your welfare. She's filing it because she's desperate and angry that her plans fell apart." I called Frank immediately after talking with Bobby, and he scheduled an emergency hearing for the following Friday. Jessica's petition would be reviewed by Judge Patricia Morrison, who had a reputation for being thorough, fair, and particularly unsympathetic to frivolous competency challenges motivated by inheritance disputes. "Dorothy, this is actually good news for us," Frank explained. "Jessica's decision to file this petition gives us the opportunity to present all our evidence in a formal legal setting, which will create an official record of her manipulation and your competence." We spent the week preparing for the hearing, organizing the recordings, gathering medical documentation of my excellent health and cognitive function, and preparing testimony from people who could speak to my business acumen and decision-making. Abilities. Dr. Anderson, my primary physician, provided a comprehensive report documenting my recovery from hip surgery and my overall excellent health for someone my age. Dr. Kim, my physical therapist, submitted a statement describing my motivation, compliance, and cognitive sharpness throughout my rehabilitation process. Most importantly, we arranged for Carmen Rodriguez to testify about my role in managing Mitchell's Fresh Market and my continued involvement in strategic decision-making for the business. The hearing took place in Judge Morrison's courtroom on a cold Friday morning in December. Jessica arrived with a lawyer who looked like he specialized in elder law, carrying a thick file of documents that presumably supported their case for my incompetence. Jessica herself looked different than I had ever seen her, dressed conservatively and wearing minimal makeup, clearly trying to project an image of concerned family member rather than scheming daughter-in-law. Her lawyer presented their case, first painting a picture of a confused elderly woman who had become paranoid and suspicious, making irrational decisions about her business and her assets based on imaginary threats and manipulative influences. Your Honor, Mrs. Mitchell has exhibited clear signs of cognitive decline over the past several months, including paranoid accusations against family members, irrational changes to long-standing estate plans, and inability to maintain appropriate social relationships. He cited my recording of family conversations as evidence of paranoid behavior, my changes to my will as proof of impaired judgment, and my conflicts with Jessica as symptoms of increasing social isolation and hostility toward people trying to help me. It was a skillful presentation that reframed every rational response I had made to Jessica's manipulation as evidence of mental deterioration. In his version of events, I was a declining senior who had turned against my loving daughter-in-law because I was no longer capable of distinguishing between reality and delusion. When it was Frank's turn to present our case, he began by playing selected portions of my recordings of Jessica. The courtroom fell silent as Jessica's own voice filled the space, laughing about waiting for me to die so she could sell my business, dismissing my competence, and admitting to consulting with Dr. Hoffman about having me declared incompetent. Judge Morrison's expression grew increasingly stern as she listened to Jessica describe my business as outdated and basically charity work disguised as commerce, and as she heard Jessica's casual admission that she had abandoned me in a parking lot and then lied about it. Your Honor, Frank said after the recordings ended, these are not the words of someone concerned about Mrs. Mitchell's welfare. These are the words of someone planning to profit from her death and frustrated that her continued competence is interfering with those plans. Frank then presented medical documentation of my excellent health, testimony from Dr. Anderson and Dr. Kim about my cognitive sharpness, and financial records showing that Mitchell's Fresh Market had continued to thrive under my leadership. Carmen Rodriguez took the stand and spoke eloquently about my continued involvement in business operations, my strategic thinking about succession planning, and my clear understanding of the financial and operational complexities of running a Bob's four-store grocery chain. Mrs. Mitchell is one of the sharpest business minds I've ever worked with, Carmen testified. Her decisions about the future of Mitchell's Fresh Market are based on 30 years of experience and a deep understanding of what makes the business successful. There is nothing confused or irrational about her planning. But the most devastating moment came when Frank called Jessica herself to the stand and played her Thanksgiving dinner admissions about consulting regularly with Dr. Hoffman and planning intervention strategies to take control of my assets. Under oath, Jessica was forced to admit that she had never actually believed I was mentally incompetent, that her consultations with Dr. Hoffman had been about finding ways to override my decision-making rather than protecting my welfare, and that her primary motivation was gaining access to my business assets. Ms. Mitchell, Judge Morrison said sternly, are you telling this court that you filed a competency petition against your mother-in-law not because you genuinely believed she was incapable of managing her affairs, but because you disagreed with her decisions about her estate planning? Jessica's lawyer tried to object, but the damage was done. Under direct questioning, Jessica had essentially admitted that her petition was motivated by financial greed rather than genuine concern for my well-being. Judge Morrison's ruling was swift and decisive. This court finds no evidence whatsoever that Mrs. Dorothy Mitchell is suffering from any cognitive impairment or mental incompetence. The medical evidence shows that she is in excellent health for someone her age. The business records demonstrate continued sound judgment and successful management, and the testimony of people who work with her daily confirms that she remains sharp, strategic, and fully capable of making complex decisions about her personal and business affairs. The judge paused and looked directly at Jessica before continuing. Furthermore, this court finds that the competency petition filed by Jessica Mitchell was frivolous, motivated by personal financial interest rather than genuine concern for Mrs. Mitchell's welfare, and based on deliberately misleading characterizations of normal family conflicts as evidence of mental decline. Judge Morrison ordered Jessica to pay all court costs and legal fees associated with the hearing, and she issued a restraining order preventing Jessica from filing any future competency challenges without substantial new evidence of actual cognitive impairment. Mrs. Mitchell, the judge said, turning to address me directly, you have every right to make whatever decisions you choose about your business and your estate planning. This court finds that your recent changes to your will reflect sound judgment and appropriate consideration of the people who have earned your trust and support through years of dedicated service. As we left the courthouse that afternoon, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying. For months, I had been fighting not just Jessica's manipulation, but the fear that maybe, somehow, she was right about my declining abilities. The judge's ruling confirmed what I had always known. I was still Dorothy Mitchell, still sharp, still capable, and still in full control of my life and my legacy. Bobby was waiting for us outside the courthouse, and when he saw the expressions on our faces, he knew immediately how the hearing had gone. Is it over, Mom? It's over, Bobby. The judge dismissed Jessica's petition completely and ruled that I'm fully competent to make my own decisions about my business and my assets. We went to dinner that night at Romano's, the Italian restaurant where Frank had taken me to celebrate the opening of my second store 15 years earlier. Carmen and Miguel joined us, along with Helen and several other longtime friends and employees who had supported me throughout this ordeal. As I looked around the table at these people who had stood by me when someone tried to destroy everything I had built, I realized that Jessica had actually done me a favor. Her attack on my competence had forced me to document my continued sharpness. Her attempt to manipulate Bobby had opened his eyes to her true character, and her greed had motivated me to create an estate plan that truly reflected my values rather than default family expectations. Mitchell's Fresh Market would survive and thrive under Carmen's leadership. My employees would be rewarded for their loyalty with financial security and continued opportunity. My community would continue to have locally owned grocery stores that treated customers like family rather than transaction units. And Jessica? Jessica had lost everything she thought she was entitled to: the business, the money, the marriage, and the respect of everyone who knew the truth about her character. 6 months later, Bobby's divorce was finalized. Jessica received minimal spousal support and no claim to any assets related to Mitchell's Fresh Market. She moved to Arizona and took a job with a commercial real estate company, presumably finding an environment that better suited her values and priorities. Bobby slowly rebuilt his life, eventually meeting someone who appreciated him for who he was, rather than what he might inherit. He never remarried, but he seemed happier and more confident than he had been in years. As for me, I moved to a small house 2 blocks from the Riverside Plaza store, where I continue to work part-time as a consultant and mentor for new employees. Carmen has exceeded every expectation I had for her leadership, growing the business, while preserving the community values that make Mitchell's Fresh Market special. Sometimes I drive past the SaveMart where Jessica abandoned me that October afternoon, and I remember the moment when I realized that someone I had tried so hard to love actually saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to wealth and convenience. That was the day I stopped being a victim and started being a strategist. That was the day Dorothy Mitchell decided to fight back against someone who had underestimated her intelligence, her resources, and her determination to protect what mattered most. Jessica thought she was dealing with a confused old woman who could be manipulated and discarded when convenient. Instead, she discovered that the woman who had built a multi-million-dollar empire from nothing was still every bit as sharp, tough, and strategic as she had been 30 years ago. The best revenge isn't just surviving someone's attempt to destroy you. The best revenge is building something so strong and meaningful that their attacks only make it stronger, and ensuring that the values they tried to corrupt continue to flourish long after they're gone. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories, right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.